we have to talk about the most probable theory involving Bryan Kohberger and the Idaho 4 with the information that's available, and the biggest problem for the state if they want to prove Bryan was the one who committed this crime. All that being said, everything's alleged. Welcome to The Point. Let's get to it.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Listen, there's been loads of theories to explain what happened in this particular situation since there was a gag and a lack of information. But to better understand where I'm going, this is where we started. Listen to this.
This is interesting too. In the affidavit, I mentioned them tracking the cell phone towers and the cell phone records of Bryan Kohberger's phone. They wanted to see if he was stalking the victims ahead of time, and at least 12 prior occasions prior to November 13th, his phone was in the area of the residence. All of these occasions, except for one, occurred in the late evening and early morning hours.
And I was looking at it. It looks like he was stalking them, because that's a lot of contact in an area, or presence in an area, one that you don't live in, and the times of day are very unique.
And this was very early on, when individuals were looking for connections and trying to make sense of the situation as it was presented in the mainstream media. And a lot of us who were seeking that connection to better understand what happened said, okay, this makes sense. This is the connection between Bryan and those 4 individuals. He was stalking the home, he was probably following a few of them on social media, or maybe he met one of them at the Mad Greek, and that's the connection we were looking for. That narrative very early on tied Bryan to the home, or at least one of the 4 individuals. But shortly following that, we were left with this.
Kohberger's lawyer also went even further in the court filing, saying, quote, "There is no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. There is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence from the victims in Mr. Kohberger's apartment, home, office, or vehicle."
And at that point, people who were being rational and objective basically said this right here.
I always wanted it to make more sense, like your brain wants to gravitate towards how make this make sense.
And he's right. We were all struggling to make it make sense, because absolutely nothing within all this at this particular point made any sense at all. Which leads us with one plausible theory, plus the biggest problem that the state needs to prepare for if they want to convict Bryan Kohberger of first-degree charges with a DP sentence. And listen, I'm not on this channel or making videos about this story trying to make the case that all this is completely impossible. I'm just talking about probability. And listen, I'm not on this channel or making videos about this story trying to make the case that this is 100% impossible. I'm just talking about probability and what makes the most sense. Because it's insanely rare to have a situation where an individual who has no connections to the victims and a home he's never been in go in with that particular type of weapon, especially an individual with the level of education Bryan has. So what about the possibility or probability that Bryan is a lurker? Or he's some type of window peeper, or he's some type of creep? Is that something that explains this particular situation? Is that something that explains the DNA found on the sheath, what little they did find, but also offers an explanation to the lack of DNA found in the home, inside the car, and in the apartment? In fact, the lack of DNA of Bryan found on any of the victims. And if you think it's impossible or doesn't make any sense whatsoever, listen to this right here.
In the filing, Kohberger's lawyer said that 2 additional males' DNA was found within the house, as well as another unknown male's DNA on a glove found outside the house, days after the Kohberger's attorney also writing that police were investigating many various possible suspects, adding that many of them provided DNA and at least one had his DNA surreptitiously taken from a discarded cigarette.
So now we have a situation where a home filled with occupants has multiple different sources of DNA found all throughout the home. And it's the type of DNA you would expect to find at a crime scene. Now, is this not something that could explain Bryan being in the area during the time of the attack, while also explaining the lack of DNA? And here's the scenario I'm talking about. And of course, all this is speculation, and this is an open discussion channel, and you can feel free to disagree at any point. But what about a scenario where Bryan was doing one of his late night drives that we know now to be true, both according to the defense and Dateline, and he stumbled across a house and he decided to try to peek through some windows because he's some type of perv. And while peeking through the window, he happened to see a bunch of people being attacked, And being that at one point in time he attempted to be a law enforcement officer, he ran in to try to do anything he could to help those individuals. He stepped into a home, saw multiple people attacked, and told one of the individuals, "It's okay, I'm here to help," which has been verified by Dylan's testimony, but quickly realized he stumbled into a crime scene. He has now placed himself in the center of a quadruple passing, and he knows this is a bad situation. So he did what any rational person would do, and he left the area because he's an individual that doesn't belong. He's a stranger in a home. And common sense would tell you, if you call 911, you're probably going to jail. You're probably being charged for a crime you didn't commit. Because it's not as if he could just tell law enforcement that on a random day, a random night, at a random time, he happened to be riding around and stumbled into a crime scene. And in a scenario where Bryan would have called 911 and he happened to be some type of lurker or perv, what do you think law enforcement would say? I mean, let's just be honest here. If Bryan would have said, "I stumbled onto a quadruple pass and I attempted to help," and when asked, "What were you doing in this area?" and he said, "I happened to peek through windows," what do you think the outcome would be? This is a scenario that explains almost all the issues a lot of us are seeing with the story as it is presented right now. And I do believe this is a scenario a rational juror trying to be objective would come to, because this is a situation that does explain the lack of DNA found in the home, in the car, and the apartment. This is a scenario that could explain why a white Hyundai Elantra was supposedly seen on surveillance video footage. This is a situation that explains why his phone would not be connected to the network, and why he would be seen in the area while simultaneously at the same time trying to say he was never in the area. It's not as if law enforcement is going to come out and say, "Yup, you're right, you're just a peeper, you had nothing to do with it at this point." The state is bringing first-degree charges. They are seeking the DP in this situation. They are not going to drop these charges. They are not going to admit to the general public that there's a possibility they're wrong here. And is the state even prepared or planning to have this type of argument come up? Is this something they're looking at and seeing? Is this something they're going to say, "We have to prove that this isn't possible"? Because if the state can't prove that this is impossible, then somebody somewhere is going to come to this determination. And at the end of the day, all it takes is one juror. Because if law enforcement put blinders on and all they focused on was this DNA left on the sheath, then there's a lot of other avenues they may not be prepared for. The alternative suspect or suspects conversation is coming up more and more as the trial gets closer. And once again, this is another theory that explains the unidentified male DNA found inside the home and outside the home on the glove. It offers a possible explanation to the DNA found on Maddie's fingernails. I have said since day one, if the guy did it, he did it and he should pay, but it's up to the state to prove it, and it's up to the state to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they're not prepared to answer this type of question by way of direct examination, cross-examination, or evidence, then there is holes in the theory they are trying to present. I don't think it's fair to say it's 100% impossible Bryan committed this crime with the information we know now. But it's also not fair to say that everything we've heard is completely common. The lack of DNA is an issue. It continues to be an issue, and it will be an issue that the state needs to address in terms of getting a jury to go and say, yes, this was the individual who committed this crime. There are loads of other theories floating around online, and I'm not here to tell you they're wrong and I'm right. I'm just trying to make sense of a situation that doesn't make sense. And based off the information available right now, this seems to be a possible theory that places Bryan at that area during the night of the attack, while simultaneously explaining why there's a lack of DNA and other evidence. This is a scenario that could explain why he was deleting searches on his internet history. Because he knows every single piece of evidence that puts him in Moscow, puts him closer to a conviction. But this video has gone on long enough. Of all the theories I've talked about on this particular channel, is this the one that makes most sense with the information that's available? And will the state have an answer to this particular theory? Are they prepared to have this covered? Is it something believable or is it complete nonsense? Maybe I'm wrong, maybe you'll let me know down in the comments below. But if you enjoy this and a more fair, open conversation, maybe check one of these videos out. Y'all be safe now.